welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. Have you ever fallen prey to a fraudster or been scammed out of some hard-earned money? The likelihood is yes, given that fraud has become one of the most lucrative businesses in the world, with little chance of the criminals behind it actually being caught. Scammers hit ordinary people where it hurts most, conning vulnerable elderly folk, as well as the apparently tech-savvy young in equal measure. BAFTA-winning investigative journalist Nick Stapleton, co-presenter of the BBC's Scam Interceptors, which is also a BAFTA winner in itself, and a regular on Morning Live, works on the front line of cons and fraud defence. His bold undercover missions outing unscrupulous businesses for rogue traders and knowledge gleaned from peering into the inner workings of fraudulent call centres, hacking the hackers if you like, with Scam Interceptors, have put Nick in a unique position to help people. His book, How to Beat Scammers, is designed to protect us from fraudsters and wrestle back power from the ever more conniving and sophisticated criminals. And as the son of BBC Watchdog legends John Stapleton and Lynn Faulds would, he's following in some very big, well-respected footsteps, carving out his own niche in the global fraud explosion we'll explore in this chat. Nick, it's exciting having you in the studio for two reasons. The first is your unrivaled expertise, it seems, in helping save people money and heartache. And the second is, of course, being friends with your lovely mum and dad since you were a little lad. And you sit before me now, a double BAFTA-winning journalist.
Can you write all of my intros, please?
Do you want me to write your next book intro?
That would be great. Yeah, that was incredibly flattering and lovely to hear. Thank you. Yeah, I forget about the first one, to be honest, in BAFTA terms, because it happened when I was still doing behind the camera stuff, when I was producing, and it was right at the very end of that. And I'd been working on this thing with Joe Lycett, which was called Joe Lycett versus David Beckham, which was about the Qatar World Cup. And I'd done a couple of series of Got Your Back, which was Joe Lycett's consumer show with him as a director. And then the company who make it asked me if I wanted to develop this David Beckham idea with them. And just as I then transitioned into doing on-camera stuff with Scam Interceptors, that got nominated for a BAFTA. And so Scam Interceptors' first series had also been nominated. I was at my first ever BAFTAs, and I sat there and watched as the team from Joe Lycett versus Beckham went up and collected a BAFTA that I'd helped develop the idea for. And so I do count as a bit my own as well. But I was with the Scam Interceptors team and we didn't win that year. So I had to sit there and be really happy that I'd won a BAFTA for me as a producer, but also be sad because I was with my team and we hadn't won. So it was a very, very strange experience. But yeah, I kind of forget that first one and it is very nice to be reminded. So thank you.
But then you did win one for Scam Interceptors.
Yeah, we did. So Series 2 won the year after. And it was kind of an interesting experience. I think it took telly about a year or two to understand what it was that we were doing. And Series 1, there was a lot in the show that feels ridiculous, much like I think if you've ever played music or anything like that, you look back on your old work and it makes you cringe listening to it. I look back on Series 1 of Scam Interceptors now and I go, wow, God, I can't believe we thought that was necessary. We had these weird magazine-y type elements in it where Rav would be out with someone who was fighting back against fly tipping or whatever it might be. But the bit that was shot in the Scam Hub, which is us intercepting scams, combining this ethical hacking with investigative journalism, worked so well that we didn't need them, basically. And then from Series 2 onwards, we just dropped them entirely and just did the intercepting. And so when Series 2 then got broadcast, that was the thing that, yeah, when the BAFTA judges saw, I think they were like, yeah, okay, this is something new and it's really good. And that is what won us the BAFTA. So dropping those magazine elements from the show sealed the deal.
And you just finished recording, quite strangely, Series 5 and 6. But Scam Interceptors really has grown organically, hasn't it, into something really special with more or less your original team.
I think we're super, super, super lucky. So we had the show commissioned out of BBC Scotland for various reasons, just in terms of sort of where money was at the time that the idea got commissioned for daytime. And there's a guy called Mark Lewis, who is a freelancer in Scotland, who I'd actually worked with remotely as a producer on a couple of different things and knew of. And then he ended up being the researcher on the first series of Scam Interceptors. And I think it says a lot about our team and our show that now Mark produces the entire show and is a producer who has been with us since day one and is still there producing Series 6. And we've got basically the core team of about 20 or 25 people have pretty much been there from Series 1 or Series 2. And the fact that everybody wants to come back year on year tells you, A, what a great team it is and what a nice time we have making it together, but also what an incredibly rewarding and enjoyable job it is. And I really mean that because I relish getting to go to work every day and doing that. And it's a very intense period. We film about 8 or 9 weeks, 4 days a week, 8 hours a day. But there's something really special about it. And it's like a superpower, basically. If you imagine that I said to you, we have the possibility to stop scams before they happen. That sounds mad. It sounds like something out of a Hollywood film, but that is genuinely what we've somehow managed to engineer a situation that we can do. And the BBC let us do, and feels like a real privilege. And I think everybody who works on the show feels that way.
What are your most satisfying moments from Scam Interceptors?
Most satisfying moments, I think. So we combine the work of ethical hackers like Jim Browning, who's a massive YouTuber, and a few others who we've signed up as well now, with our team of people who have a background in investigative journalism like me. And when you combine those two things together, it's quite potent in trying to work out who people are. So not just the victims who we contact and we say don't pay out, but also from series 2 onwards, we started to realize that we could really use this to our advantage in working out who the scammers themselves were. So I think the first year, series 2, where we started actually confronting the bosses of some of these companies, that was a really enjoyable thing for me because in my previous career doing production, I had always worked on things like Rogue Traders, where we would get to go and doorstep people with Matt Allwright, and it was my favorite part of my job. But then getting to do that myself, even though in Scam Interceptors it tends to be over the phone. We have done some in-person things, but not necessarily with scammers because they're often not in the UK. But those moments where we actually started to really be able to hold people to account for the scams that were happening, because I think this is a huge problem, and a massive part of the issue is that there is so much of it happening and yet so little justice. And so I think we're very lucky that we're so on the side of the angels. They always come to us and they're like, oh, it's so good to finally see some scammers get their comeuppance because they've been getting away with this for so long. So I think getting to do those confrontations and feeling those moments where you could sort of hear the whites of their eyes in the same way that you can imagine that they make their victims feel when they steal their money. That was great. I love that. I always will.
You're making such a difference. That's my favourite aspect of the programme. And we'll talk more about it, obviously, in a minute. But you've just hot-footed it here, having appeared on Morning Live. We're in London now. It's filmed in Manchester, but you've been on a live link this morning talking about a heartbreaking and really, really shocking scam, I think, on TikTok.
Unbelievably grim. Yeah. So this scam, I came across it just after Christmas, and I'd used TikTok with reasonable regularity. I think it's a pretty good medium for discovering interesting things and recipes and stuff like that. I quite like cooking and I use it for that. But basically something popped up into my feed that was called @cancer.care.kids. Basically, it was a video of a very, very ill child. And written on the screen was, stick around for 10 seconds and help my baby. And this is a known thing on TikTok because TikTok has this thing called the Creator Fund, where basically if you get over a certain number of followers, I think it's 10,000, you can then start claiming money for views of your videos. And this video at that point had almost 1 million views. And I opened the comments, and in the comments, there was all these people interacting with it and just saying random stuff in the comments just to give the video more boost and give it more engagement so that it got pushed into more people's feeds. And replying to a lot of those comments was the person who owned the account saying, please donate, link in bio. So I looked at their page and there was a link in the bio on the page and it was a PayPal link. And I thought, that's a bit weird. Hang on a minute. And so I scrolled through the rest of the page. There was tons of different videos of tons of different children with horrible ailments like cancer. The text on every single video said, please help my baby specifically. And that instantly got my hackles up because I just thought, hang on a second, nobody has this many different babies who are ill. There's something wrong here. Click on the PayPal link, open it, and it says, please donate to God's grace. And I just thought, this is something not right. Okay, there's a very slim chance that this person is taking donations through that PayPal link and then disseminating them out to the families of all of these children who have cancer. But I did a reverse image search and all those videos were stolen. They were used by real families who were posting this stuff. And on top of that, this particular video had 2 million views. This person had over 10,000 followers. So they're probably making money just from the views on the videos as well as through this PayPal link. So they were literally going as low as I could possibly imagine to go. This person actually using very, very ill children to try and scam money out of people who think they're giving to children with cancer and they're just paying some random person with PayPal.
What can you do, Nick? Have you been able to help close that down?
So, as ever with the social media giants, my efforts to report it personally were met with a response that said that the account didn't breach their community guidelines.
Oh my goodness.
I made a second video where I said, to my followers, please report this, because I'm as sure as I can be that it's a scam. Obviously, I can't say for certain this person wasn't distributing that money out, but come on. Anyway, we did it as an item on Morning Live. We replied TikTok, and guess what happened?
It's taken down.
They took the account down. But honestly, that tends to be the only way you can get like the big tech giants to actually do something in this kind of situation, because it's so easy for them to just run all of that algorithmically. So they basically take reports. If it doesn't fit very specific criteria, their algorithm just goes, this is fine, right? But so much of the time, scammers know how to work around that criteria. And so they'll do something like this, where it's kind of nebulous. It's a scam, but it's not 100% definitely a scam. And so then when we report it to them and highlight TikTok's actual attention to it, and a human looks at it and they go, oh, this is a scam, of course they ban it straight away.
God, that's incredible. Can you give us an idea of the fraud explosion, as you call it, and the scale of what has become this extraordinary, unscrupulous industry?
In the UK particularly, it is absurd. So the estimates in Britain vary widely, but you can usually find something between about 10 billion and about 17 billion quid a year, which is estimated to be lost from the UK in scams and fraud. And if it's the higher number there, if it's 17 billion, that's more than we spend annually on all of policing. It's about 4 times what we spend on prisons. It's about 10% of an NHS. So it's a lot of our economy that is going into a black market from where it simply doesn't come back. Fraud is our most common type of crime, so it's more than 40% of all crime. And the example that I always use when I'm talking about this is, imagine that was burglary. Or imagine that was mugging in the street, or something that wasn't remote and where it wasn't very easy to brush victims under the carpet. You would have legislative action tomorrow from the government and from the authorities. But because of the fact that this is A, cross-border, a lot of the time anyway, B, remote, so people don't have it happen to them in person, it's not quite as violent or as invasive as something like having your house burgled maybe, I think it's incredibly easy just to go, oh, and people just don't really register how insane that is. But if I told you that we were losing £17 billion a year to anything else, I think a lot of people would be raising their eyebrows and going, well, hang on a minute, we've got to take some action here. And the worst thing about it, I think, is the lack of serious consequence for the vast majority of scammers. So I haven't got the absolute most up-to-date figures on this, but as of about 2024, we were solving 0.01% of all fraud cases. So that's 1 in every 1,000 victims of fraud getting some kind of justice. Compare that to other types of crime. That's not because the police are so bad at dealing with fraud. It is simply because there is so much of it, basically.
So much of it, and probably they haven't got time to get to it in the same way as they might get to a burglary or a knife attack or something like that. But actually, while we're thinking about it, though, the cost to the victim is enormous. And I'm not talking about money they lose. There's a real psychological cost, isn't there, here, and an emotional cost if you are the victim of fraud.
Yeah, 100%. There's some really quite disturbing figures around people who have been successfully defrauded, the amount of them who then end up self-harming, the amount of them who then end up having psychological distress, like ending up depressed or something like that. And my anecdotal experience of it working on Scam Interceptors is, I can't tell you the amount of times that we have spoken to somebody who has just been about to pay out money to a scam and they just immediately burst into tears because they were so panicked, so incredibly alarmed by what it was that they were being told over the phone. And so many of the scams themselves as well are intentionally psychologically distressing because they're trying to knock you off balance. They're trying to get you...
Are they really?
Oh, absolutely. So, for example, series 4 of Scam Interceptors, we had a group in the show who were pretending to be the National Crime Agency and would target people who were very recently arrived in the UK by calling customers of Lebara and Leica Mobile, which is like free international calls. So they knew they were getting people who wanted free international calls, largely people who are foreign exchange students here, people who are second-generation immigrants, things like that. And they would basically tell them that if they didn't comply with what they were being told, they'd be arrested because they were under investigation and there was accounts in their name that had been used for criminality, and they'd lose their immigration status and be deported and all this horrible stuff. The amount of times when we spoke to those people where, A, they were utterly terrified, genuinely disturbed by what they've been told and in floods of tears because of the fact that they were so disbelieving of us then saying to them, hey, look, that guy you were talking to, he's nothing to do with the National Crime Agency. The police aren't going to ring you up and tell you if you're about to be arrested. That's not a thing. They just wouldn't believe it because they were so incredibly terrified of what they'd been told. And what that does, that fear, is it gets you what's called outside of your rational mind. So your rational mind is what you use to make big financial decisions. So for example, if you're buying a house or you're renting a new property, you're going to sit down and you're going to think about it quite a lot. And you're going to take quite a long time to make a measured call as to whether or not this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Scammers want to get you to a place where you make that same decision without any time thinking about it and without being able to use that rational decision-making process to think about it. And fear, urgency, pressure is all a great way to do that.
And you confronted some of the people pretending to be from the National Crime Agency, didn't you?
Yeah, we did, yeah. And one of them in particular, this is where the great benefits of ethical hacking come in handy. We had access to his computer and unbelievably, for a scammer, this is quite rare, he was using his personal computer to do the scamming. So we had not just a picture of his face, not just his full name, we had his government ID off his computer, as well as a donor registry card. So we had everything from a picture of his face to his blood type. And we sent it all off to the authorities in that part of India, and obviously bit of an open and shut one for them. So I'm pretty sure that he had some pretty serious consequences. But yeah, I think most scammers aren't that dumb, but he was particularly silly to be doing it from his own computer and having all that information on there as well.
I think in your book, the stats that you share at the beginning, I do love a stat, and they were absolutely eye-watering. And you talked about the global cost of cybercrime. Fill us in on that.
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating stat from this business called Cybersecurity Ventures, who are like a fraud research business. And they reckon that the total value of cybercrime, which is all of fraud that uses an internet connection, makes cybercriminals the third largest economy in the world. So it would put them behind only the US and China in terms of total value. The figure, having said I would be able to remember this off the top of my head, I've now forgotten what it is. Is it 1.5 trillion?
It was $3 trillion in 2015. But rising, we think, to $10 trillion in 2025.
There you go. So that would make them the third largest economy in the world in 2025. And I think it's so easy when you talk about numbers like this that people just go, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand what that volume of money is. But putting it in the context of saying, okay, but that makes them the third largest economy in the world, I think kicks people's brains into gear.
I know. Yeah. And also, I think surely the rise must be to do with the internet, because, you know, looking back to my childhood back in 1833 or something, when we just had a telephone book and a landline with a curly wire on it, I learned actually to send an email when I was at GMTV with your dad. So that shows what my childhood was like. But we didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have laptops. My kids think it's hilarious that we didn't have any of that until I was in my 30s, but it must make it so much easier. And presumably AI getting more and more sophisticated is going to make it even easier.
Yeah, it definitely has made it easier, but it's specifically made a certain thing easier, which is very specifically scamming. So it's made it considerably easier to steal somebody's money remotely without ever having to show your face. So where previously, if you were a criminal and you wanted to rob someone, you'd have to do it in the street with a knife or learn to pickpocket or whatever it might be. Now you can be in the comfort of your own home and learn how to scam people. And there's so many routes to speaking to your customers. They would call their potential victims customers. Because previously, if you wanted to run phone scams, for example, getting hold of the data needed to be able to scam people would have been a roadblock in the 1980s, for example, even in the 1990s. But the widespread proliferation of broadband internet and the way that all of our interactions with business have gone online as well has created this situation in which all of our data is out there now. All of our data is up for grabs. And every single time that you sign up for a new app, every single time that you set up a new account for something online, none of us read that terms and conditions thing that pops up. Of course we don't. It's enormously long. But the reason it's enormously long is because it buries all kinds of terrible things that they're doing with our data. And every single time you say yes to that, you're saying yes to your data being sold onto third parties. Okay, well, what third parties and how scrupulous are they? And if the answer is not very, then that data is going to end up in the hands of scammers at some point in the near future. And that creates a situation where it's super easy for scammers because they can ring you up and they can go, oh yeah, hello Helen, I'm talking about your card that ends in this, because they bought that data from some company who you set up an account with some years ago or whatever. And it's really easy for them to sound convincingly like your bank because they've got genuine data on you. So there's a lot of things that have made their lives a lot easier. Broadband internet is right up there.
And does it also mean that younger people are subject to scams? In the old days, it tended to be perhaps my mum would ring and she'd had a bit of a dodgy phone call that she wasn't sure about, saying I was in trouble somewhere and needed money. But are younger people targeted more because of their use of apps and TikTok and phones? And
yes, is the simple answer to that question. So I think, as you say, historically, the thinking around scams and fraud was that this was something that happened to elderly people, perhaps people who weren't tech savvy. That is simply not the case anymore. That's completely untrue. Our most targeted group in the UK in terms of demographic, I think, is 18 to 34, and specifically chose the word targeted there because whilst they are our most targeted group, they don't lose as much money to scams and fraud as people who are slightly older, but that's because they don't have as much to lose. It's not because they're more savvy. So whilst older members of the population lose larger amounts when they do get scammed, if you're a scammer, of course, it's much more easy to target younger people because there's simply so many more ways in which you can get in touch with them, and thus so many more narratives you can spin to be able to effectively scam them because they've got multiple different online accounts, they've got multiple different ways to pay online, and more importantly, they're in competent control of those things. So say you get a person who's 22 on the phone, who's maybe in their last year of university and just got their first bank account a few years before, being able to persuade them that you work for their bank and that they need to transact money into a safe account because their accounts have been hacked or there's been fraudulent payments or whatever, you can do that all within one phone call, right? Because they can do it with their online banking. They can send you that money. If you're talking to somebody who's 78 and you need to send them down to the local branch of their bank to withdraw money as cash to then post it to an address that you've got a mule living at or whatever it might be, there's so many more roadblocks there that you have so much less control because they've got to go to the bank, talk to the person who works at the bank, who's going to be trained to say, hang on a minute, you've never taken out £2,000 in cash before. Why do you need £2,000 in cash now? You've got to role play that conversation with your potential victim to get them past the person in the bank. And even then, once they get home, you've got to call them back again and go, okay, now I need you to post the money to this. Do you see what I mean?
Is there much we can do to protect ourselves from this data thing? Because I have days, Nick, where I'm joining apps and things and I'm very careful about what I sign up to. And then there's other days where I think, these are pages and pages long. You don't really know when you tick that box that says, are you happy to have the essential cookies or whatever? You don't really know what that means. And I've just presumed that all my info's out there, which is quite terrifying in a way.
I think the really simple way to protect yourself is just to assume that absolutely anything that comes completely out of the blue is a scam and operate from there. And that's a really sad way to have to be. But I'm afraid this problem is that bad that that's the only way you can realistically protect yourself. So regardless of whether it's an email you're not expecting, a text message you're not expecting, a direct message on social media you're not expecting, or a phone call you're not expecting, it's probably going to be a scam. And if you operate from that basis, then you'll be much better off. And the thing I always say about this is do your due diligence, look into stuff. Don't just act quickly. I know we're all busy, but you will never regret taking the time to research something and doing your due diligence, but you will regret getting scammed. So just take the time to do it.
Have you ever been scammed?
I've come very, very close on a number of occasions, and I'm pretty certain that one in particular was specifically tailored to me. This was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So I've had a little bit of an established profile as a person who tried to take on scammers by this point. And I've got an email that was it's very complicated, but it was a message from a business-to-business communication platform that told me I had a message in my inbox on there that was telling me I had a copyright strike against my Meta for Business account. Now, I have Meta for Business is like a paid version of Facebook and Instagram that I use for work. And I had just put out a video, and it specifically referenced that video and specifically referenced a piece of music in that video. And it said, Warner Brothers own that piece of music and you need to take it down, you need to fill out this form, or we're going to take your account down, suspend you. And I looked at it quite late at night and I thought, well, this is weird. I didn't know that Meta used this particular business-to-business communication platform. So I tried to do a bit of research. Couldn't find any information to confirm that, but couldn't find any information to disconfirm it either. So I thought, okay, what harm is there in me downloading this business-to-business platform, checking out the message? So I download it, sign up with my business email, and sure enough, when I opened the inbox, there was a message there that looked like it was from Meta saying there was a copyright strike against my account. So again, I opened the message, read through it, flawlessly written corporate communication. Looking back now, certain it was written by AI, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But it was flawless. Get to the bottom of it, and it said, you need to click on this link, which was a facebook.com link. So I knew it was safe, and fill out the form. And I thought, okay, fair enough. This must be legit because it was facebook.com. So I clicked on the facebook.com link, opened it. It opened a page in Facebook that had all the details of the copyright strike. And then when I got to the very bottom of it, there was another link. And this was the point at which I was like, this has got to be a scam. Why would they be going really round the houses to get me to this point? So this second page within Facebook was called Copyright Assistance Inbox. And I get to this second page, read the whole thing. There's a link at the bottom. And I just thought at this point, I was too curious not to click on the link. And I have various ways that I can do this stuff safely. So I just thought, forget it. I'll just click on it and see what happens. I opened this link and immediately all my concerns about this being a scam were dissolved. There was a beautifully animated Facebook logo that dissolved into WhatsApp, Instagram, and then that all rolled back into the Meta logo and it burst and disappeared. And then I was looking at a perfectly recreated Meta for Business webpage. So I was like, oh, the way they've got this to me is weird, but this is real. So I start looking at the form, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and I put some information in about the video and stuff like that. I get to the very bottom of the page, and it asks for my username and password. And I just knew, at that point, I was like, okay, I'm already logged in. There's no reason they need this information again. But I think that entire lead up, all of the window dressing that was there, which was pretty extensive, was basically just designed to try and hack me and to try and get my username and password so then they could take control of my account. And in those situations, normally it's so that they can ransom it back to you or so that they can try and use your account to defraud other people who follow you. That was the closest I've ever come. When I saw the username and password thing, obviously I knew immediately it was definitely a scam, but I did go all the way through to that point.
And is this how AI is going to make it even harder to detect stuff? Because scammers can perfect the approach that they make to their victims.
Yeah, this is perhaps what people don't quite understand about the way that scammers can use AI yet. So I think just to put this in context, if you think about the effect that widespread use of broadband internet had on the world of scams and fraud, it created a situation which we just discussed in which essentially everybody now is online. Scammers from anywhere in the world can contact you by phone or by email, by text message or by direct message on social media and try and defraud you because we've all got these ways to pay online. And it also did another thing, which has created what's called an information gap, right? So people like me, I'm 38 years old. I didn't grow up with social media. It came in when I was in my teenage years. But I'm still in a better position than people who are 50 or people who are 60 or people who are 70, because to them, this technology was totally alien. And suddenly they had to learn this whole new set of skills about information technology, how to run digital finances, all this stuff. Brilliant for scammers, right? Because scammers can go, you don't know the norms of how modern banking works. You don't know the norms of how big tech operates. So that's a little hole for me that I can work my way into and try and steal some of your money. That's about to happen all over again with AI. And we haven't even got to the point where we close the information gap from broadband internet yet. So AI is going to open up this whole new set of rules where all the advice that I normally give around scams and fraud is basically going to go out the window, because there's going to be so many different ways that scammers can use AI to upgrade existing scams and to create entirely new ones. The main thing that I've seen scammers use AI for so far is to create, as I said in that scam that tried to get me, perfect corporate communication. So where previously you could look at a scam email and go, the grammar's a little dodgy, seems like it's written in English as a second language, it comes from something that looks a bit like a sketchy email address, formatting's not quite right. Or you could click through onto a clone website and look at it and go, it's a little pixelated around the edges, the font isn't quite right for whatever brand that's supposed to be. Scammers are just going to get AI to do that for them now. And it's not going to have any of those mistakes, and the website is going to look perfect. And so that is going to create a situation in which everything people have learned about how to deal with scams is suddenly not going to apply anymore. And we haven't even touched on the deepfake potential or the possibility to create people's voices.
Go on, tell me the deepfake. I think I spot deepfake doctors actually on because I'm interested in health and wellness. I'm sure doctors and Buddhist monks are popping up on my Instagram.
I made a film about this for Morning Live.
Did you?
Actually called Deepfake Doctors. Yeah. So this is a really common way that scammers try and sell fake supplements and pills that are supposedly going to be like weight loss pills. They'll get, Dr. Hillary, they'll get Dr. Hillary or another famous TV doc like Dr. Zando I'm on Morning Live with. And what they'll do is they'll just take a short clip of them and they'll feed it into generative AI, and then they'll have them on that show. So it'll look like it's the program they appear on, saying something they never said, and use it to advertise some dodgy product. You have no idea what it's in, etc., etc. It's guaranteed to be an advert you'll see on social media or similar, and it's a big, big problem. But the worst thing is the speed at which AI is moving. It's getting so good at making these deep fakes. So where a year ago I could have said to you, Helen, when you're watching a video and you're not certain whether it's real or fake, watch out for whether the shapes of the mouth actually match the words that are coming. Watch out for the evenness of tone. So if they talk like this the entire time and don't use the peaks and troughs of normal human emotion, it's probably a scam. None of that applies now. AI's got too good. I watch videos all the time now on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it might be, and I just don't know. I'm no longer sure. I watched one the other day, in fact, of a priest who was coming running out of a church. It was about the ICE raids in the US, and there was ICE agents outside of a church, and this priest came running out and he was telling them, you know, my church is love and you need to stay away from here and all this stuff. And I watched the whole thing, and not once did I think, you know what, that might be AI. And then when I actually looked into it, it was completely fake.
God, it's quite frightening, isn't it?
It's really bad because I've said that in a really cheery way. It is really bad. And it's really bad because if you think the last 100 years of human history, we've all been able to trust the evidence of our eyes and ears, right? We've all got very used to the idea that you can watch moving images of something and that most likely will be a real representation of what is happening. The potential uses of that where that's no longer the case are almost unending. I think about this one quite a lot. So, for example, say you wanted to really badly defame somebody. Why don't you just make a video of them doing something that they've never actually done that is incredibly awful or incredibly discriminatory? Because what was it we say about a lie, that a lie gets around the world before the truth's laced up its shoes or whatever it is? That is going to be a huge problem with deepfakes and with AI because of the fact that not just from a scams and fraud perspective, but from a misinformation perspective, what's going to happen when I can just make a video of a person who I don't like and make them doing something awful and then post it on my social media and immediately it'll get watched by thousands of people? That information's out there in the world now. And that person's not going to be able to get the video out afterwards to go, sorry, that wasn't me, because no one will know which one's real and which one's fake.
So how are you able to advise people moving forward? Because a few years ago, it was easier to say, watch out for this, watch out for that. But in this new world that we're moving into now, what tips can you give to help people not fall prey to this?
So I think there's a few quite interesting things here. I think everyone's going to have to get a lot better at critical thinking. I think we've lost critical thinking as a skill because we've all got really used to the idea that you can just go online and grab whatever information is there and it will help you to have a more informed opinion about something. But unfortunately, we've reached a place where I'm afraid I think that the internet, particularly video on the internet, is essentially going to become valueless because every time you go on it, you're not going to have the faintest idea whether what you're looking at is legitimate or completely made up. So the only way that you're going to be able to be sure is if you can research it yourself and go, okay, here's a video of Keir Starmer telling me about an investment opportunity where if I put in £250, I'm going to make £50,000 a month. If that was real, that would be everywhere. So I'll go on a search engine and I'll search for Keir Starmer investment opportunity. And if I can't find BBC News reporting this thing that Keir Starmer said, then I know that was an AI video I was looking at. So I think everybody's going to need to get their journalist hat on a little bit and learn how to properly reference things, because a single source of information that you've seen on your social media or you've seen just browsing on some random website is no longer going to be sufficient for you to be able to believe something is true.
And of course, scamming is as old as time itself. You write really eloquently about a scam going back to 300 BC featuring two Athenian shipping merchants. Tell me more.
In the intro of the book, yeah. So I think there's a really interesting history of scams and fraud, actually. So the Athenian shipping merchants scam is really confusing, but basically they came up with an insurance ruse, if I remember correctly, where they were moving product using a boat out of the docks in Athens. And they took out insurance against the contents of the boat, sold all the contents of the boat, and then sunk the ship and tried to claim the insurance. But I think they both actually drowned in the process of sinking the ship. So
they didn't make much out of it.
Didn't really work out, yeah. But I feel like it might be apocryphal because how would anyone have known if they'd both drowned during the sinking anyway? But there's loads of really interesting examples. You look at Ponzi schemes and stuff like that. There's a very long history of this. There's a really, really interesting one about a guy in medieval times as well who pretended to be an heir to the throne quite successfully for a very long time. So yeah. There's a very long history of scams and fraud.
In my world, I remember ITV did the who do you think you are type thing. And we did that for morning television and the call went out, has anybody got an interesting bit of family history? And in my purse, I have a really beautiful old business card and it's from the Princess of Orange, who's supposed to be a Belgian relative of mine. And so we made this whole piece. I went to Belgium and investigated this whole thing. And the Princess of Orange, who is a relative of mine, was a scammer. And she had some very fine business cards printed in the 1800s.
Wow.
And she would turn up at extraordinary parties. And there's a little bit of our family, distant family, who disowned my mum and dad after this was revealed on breakfast television that we weren't indeed related to Belgian royalty.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you weren't indeed related to Belgian royalty, but also how interesting is that? So in the 1800s, all you needed to do was print out some business cards.
Yeah.
And it was that easy to get away with pretending to be somebody else. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that now, but obviously AI is certainly going to help you if you do want to do it.
This, to me, knowing you, Nick, feels a little bit of a daft question, but how did you end up down this course in the first place?
So obviously grew up watching mum and dad doing very similar stuff. And when I was at university, I actually did a drama degree, not because I thought I wanted to be an actor or anything like that, but because I was quite lazy. And I remember thinking, I'm quite good at this. What's going to keep me interested for 3 years and that I might get good scores in? And so I picked it for that reason, basically. The degree I did was actually more about visual arts. So I did a lot of stuff playing around with cameras as part of my degree. And it made me realize, actually, I quite like this work. I quite like making weird stuff with cameras, which is a lot of what I did as my dissertation. I wonder if I might be genetically quite good at this. And I thought it might be an advantage here for me in the world of work if I just try and go into the same thing or similar thing as what mum and dad did. But I was super, super conscious that I hated the idea of people going, oh, he's here because his mum and dad did that same thing. So when I left university, I just pumped my CV out to as many different independent production companies as I could and just tried to get a bottom level running job in an indie. And look, I'm not going to pretend for a second the work experience that I'd had got through dad when I was 16 years old, who helped me out to get work experience at ITN and all that stuff didn't count in my favour. It definitely did. But I tried to forge my own path and not take advantage of any contacts that they had. So I ended up going quite a roundabout way to getting to the type of TV work that I do now. I started working at an indie called 2-4, who make a lot of fact-tent stuff. They gave me work experience on a comedy show. I started as a runner there. I worked my way up to be a junior researcher. And then, bizarrely, this is one of those happenstance career things that I think happens to a lot of people. When I was a junior researcher, I was working on a quiz show for them. And the quiz show I was working on, there'd been a change of commissioner at the channel it was for. The new commissioner didn't want it. So they had to decommission it when we'd already started making it. And there was this horrible moment where we were all in a room together. There was about 25 of us working on the show. And the creative director of the company had to come in and go, I'm really sorry, guys, everyone's sacked because they don't want the show anymore. So I don't have jobs for any of you. But then he took me to one side afterwards and he was like, Nick, because you've been here for 6 months or whatever it was by this point, working on the previous show I was working on, you have to stay. We can't let you go.
Oh.
Because it would have been the employment law or whatever.
Yeah.
They actually couldn't get rid of me. So they gave me a job on their development team. And I started doing development, which is coming up with ideas for shows, basically. And I ended up with a staff job at that company, doing it for 3.5 years, and worked from being a junior researcher to being an assistant producer in development. In my last year in development, we signed a development contract with Matt Allwright, who presented Rogue Traders. And I got to meet Matt. And we pitched an idea to him called Housing Enforcers, which was my only ever idea in 3.5 years in development that got commissioned.
Well done.
Most soul-destroying job ever, Helen. And when Housing Enforcers got commissioned, I said to 2-4, look, I want to get out of doing development. Would you let me go and be a researcher on this show? Obviously, it's my idea. They were really good at kind of letting people work on their own ideas from the development team because I think it helped make sense of everything. And so I ended up working really closely with Matt for about a year making that show. As a researcher, out on location with him, I was the sort of SP's right-hand man in making sure all the edit functioned and all that stuff. But just in meeting Matt loved Mum, was a huge fan of Mum and Dad, generally speaking. We talked about that a lot. And I told him that I was really interested in working in investigative documentary because I think it had always been at the back of my mind. I'd worked out after 3.5 years in development that wasn't something I wanted to do with my life. And he said, come to a networking event that we have for Rogue Traders and Watchdog. So I did, and about 3 months after that, I was a researcher on Rogue Traders. I then basically just never looked back. I knew straight away that that was the thing that I'd been looking for, because I never really felt it with development and just normal production of factual shows, documentary and stuff. But as soon as I started working in investigative on Rogue Traders, a guy called Alan Holland, who was the editor of Watchdog at the time. Within about 2 weeks of me starting the job, he was like, "You're going to do an undercover." And I thought, oh, cool, okay. I didn't even know that was in the sphere of possibility for me. But I think, within about 2 months of that, I was in a used car dealership in Stoke wearing a hidden camera and thinking, how did this happen? How did this happen? But I loved it. And that then became my specialism. And I did secret filming as an undercover reporter and as a researcher on Road Traders, all the way up to then directing other people and training other people how to do undercover. And I was very lucky. I had a 10-year career in telly as a freelancer, 7 years of which were doing investigative journalism before I even started doing on-camera stuff.
I'm very fond of Alan Holland. I had no work at one point for 6 months, and my agent sent me to yet another interview at the BBC where they kept telling me, "You're very ITV." So I'm not very ITV. I worked at Sky and all over the place. And I nearly fell off my chair in the little coffee shop next to the BBC with Alan Holland for Watchdog when he said, "Right, so what kind of films do you think you'd want to make?" And he said to me, "Did you just nearly fall off the chair?" And I was like, yes, because I'd grown up with Watchdog and it was a show I really wanted to work on. Do you think, though, staying with Mum and Dad just for a moment before I do want to talk to you about the undercover stuff, I guess you grew up with watching Mum and Dad do their shtick on Watchdog, and particularly your mum, who you've dedicated the book to, as well as your lovely wife, Lise. You watched her really changing people's lives and being a real consumer champion, didn't you? So I'm guessing that has rubbed off. And there's nothing wrong with that rubbing off as you watch your parents do their thing growing up. I'm a journalist. My dad was a journalist for 46 years. Do you think some of that campaigning spirit's perhaps a bit in your DNA?
Definitely, yeah. I remember watching Mum doing what she did and just thinking she was super brave, and also having real respect for how much joy she took out of helping people and how much energy it seemed to give her. And when I started doing that kind of work on Road Traders, I just got real emotional value from my work that I just never got previously. And I found it incredibly motivating. And it just took me into a place where it really snowballed within me, that feeling. And then I just got really addicted to the job and really just loved doing it. And I think the values that they instilled in me growing up definitely are a huge part of that, because the way they looked at the world in terms of social justice and in terms of wanting people to have a fair shot at things and holding people to account when they were nasty to other people definitely then inspired me to carry on the family business like that. And I think I didn't want to use my name or their contacts to get me there. So it was really important to me that I forged my own path. And I'm actually really glad that I did, because it gave me a really interesting insight into the business of telly before I got then into doing this on-camera stuff or doing investigative stuff at all. And I think that's given me actually a really interesting framework for a career now, because I do have a sense of what it takes to make a TV format that is successful and what commissioners want and that kind of thing. So I think the combination of all those things has really benefited me. But obviously, Mum and Dad have been an enormous part of why I do what I do. And yeah, the book, it sounds weird now that the book's only dedicated to Mum, because Dad was still around when the book came out. But now that Dad's gone as well, if I have to write another one, I'll dedicate it to him.
He was your best mate, wasn't he? You did a beautiful article after sadly he passed away towards the end of last year. Beautiful article, I think it was in the Times. Was it Relative Values?
Yeah.
And your relationship with each other. But you had massive interest in Manchester City and your football and all that kind of thing. But genuinely, he was your best mate, wasn't he?
That Relative Values thing was actually book PR. So I was slightly miffed with them about this, but basically they didn't put it out for months and months and months and months and months, because my book came out in February 2025 and we did it in like January 2025 or something, and they never put it out. And Dad and I were messaging each other about it like once a week, being like, where's the Relative Values piece? He was going out and buying the Sunday Times every Sunday to try and get the magazine so he could read the piece. And he kept messaging me about it, going, where the hell is it? Where the hell is it? And I was like, Dad, I wish I knew. I've got to understand, like, it was meant to come out in February when the book came out to give the book a push. And then, of course, when he died, they put it out days after he died. So they saw their chance and they took it, and fair enough. But they did make it look like I was trying to use his death as a way to sell books, because my book was at the back of the article going, buy Nick's book. And
oh, dear. Well, thankfully, it didn't come across like that.
No, I'm glad. Look,
that to me.
Sorry, to answer your question, yes, he was he was like my best friend. And we had a really great relationship, particularly through our love of Manchester City. He took me to my first game in 1994. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, and we had season tickets for about 20 something years. So I started going regularly with him when I was 16. And it's just the most amazing thing that we got to share together. It's interesting. Someone said something to me about this that has really stuck with me, which is that men generally are really bad at having face-to-face difficult conversations. Particularly men who are related to each other are crap at looking each other in the eye and having a conversation about something that's hard. Football gives you the ability to have those conversations without needing to look at each other in the eye because you sit next to each other. And so literally just by virtue of the fact that you're side by side rather than face to face, it gives you this place to talk about hard stuff. We would drive to away games together. We would get trains together, and then you sit at the game together. The amount of tough things that we talked about in the context of going to football is amazing, and it really brought us together.
And was it nice in a way, Nick, that when you lost him, so many people came out with so many beautiful stories, many of which I'm sure you probably didn't know. I remember at the funeral you stood up and said that people had asked you what's it like to be the son of two television legends, and your answer was that you didn't really know because to you they were mum and dad. But were you overwhelmed about that outpouring of affection for both your mum and your dad?
Yeah, it was crazy. And I think when mum died, it was COVID, so it was quite difficult to get a sense of the full scale of it because there was only 10 of us allowed at the funeral. And there was lots of lovely tributes online and in papers and stuff like that. But then when dad died, suddenly it was like all of that mum grief had been postponed, both in terms of people's feeling, but also then for me personally. And so then to have 300 and something people at the funeral was just absolutely crazy, and all there to celebrate both of them as well, not just dad as the one who died most recently, but the fact that mum had died at a time when they couldn't. So honestly, it was a lot, and I found it incredibly touching and really very moving, but honestly not surprising because of the things that people said to me about what they were like to work with and told me about the things that they'd done for them over the years. If I manage to get even 5% of the way towards changing people's lives in the way that they have, I'll be very, very, very happy indeed.
I think you're well on your way now. Just tell me a little bit about the undercover stuff you did, Nick, because I flirted with a little bit of undercover stuff and some of it did terrify me in a way. I failed to get a panorama on pub scams and I was willing to go undercover and buy a pub, and I'm probably grateful I didn't. But did you have any really hairy moments when you were on Rogue Traders? Because, I mean, the people that you're trying to expose are some deeply unpleasant people often, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I definitely had some hairy moments. So I remember the very first undercover I ever did, I was really nervous, obviously, because you can't get your brain away from the fact that you are wired up and you're wearing gear that is going to expose these people who are doing something terrible. But the more I did it, the more normal it became. And then because I was good at it, I think partly because of the fact that I just am quite decent at forming a question that gets people to say something that they shouldn't say or to make them feel at ease enough to say something they shouldn't say, I got really blasé. I got really blasé, yeah. And it actually ended up being that the scariest things that happened to me were the things that happened when I was feeling really blasé about things. So I then, some years later, I went on to do a program for Channel 5 called Undercover Criminal. And basically, I pretended to be not from the UK for a lot of time because I'm all right at doing voices. And I was being a waiter for a company who catered weddings, but they were exploiting illegal labour. So they were getting people who didn't have the right to work in the UK and then paying them £3 an hour, which is far less than minimum wage, to wait on these massive weddings, right? So I'm working one of these weddings, and at the time it was when Russia had just invaded Ukraine for the first time, so 2014. And so I was pretending to be from Donetsk, I was pretending to be Ukrainian, and I was doing a Ukrainian accent and working this wedding. And I had a guy working with me who was Polish, and he was the one who I was like, oh man, I don't want to work with this guy because he's the most likely to suss out that my accent isn't legit. And he worked in twos, so he had to like carry huge plates of food. And then when you got to the table, one of them would take the plates and put them on the table from the one who was holding the two plates. I'm standing there holding 2 plates of food, gigantic, enormous platters. And my Polish mate's taking the plates from me, putting on the table. And somebody who was sat at the table turned around to me and goes, what's the dessert, by the way? And when you're in undercover, you kind of need to have two brains because you need to do your actual job, which is the thing you're there for, which in this case was exposing the working practices of the company who are exploiting illegal labour. But then you also have to do your other job, which is the job you're there to do, which is to hold plates and to be a Ukrainian person, right? So I'm holding the plates. My Polish mate takes one from me. This person asked me this question, and it was just too many different things going on. And so I just turned to the person at the table and answered in my normal voice and said, oh, it's a cheesecake or whatever. And they looked at me like, what just came out of that guy's mouth? And luckily, it was so loud in this place, because it was a huge wedding, that the Polish guy didn't notice at all. But honestly, the beads of sweat that dripped down my forehead and down the back of my neck in that moment, because I thought, A, these people are horrible. They will beat me up if they realise what's going on here. But also just the fear, just thinking if this ruins the entire investigation and it's all lost, etc., etc. That's probably my closest run ever, to be honest.
As your profile has risen, does that mean that you couldn't really do the undercover stuff so much? Because I think you weren't as high profile when you were doing Rogue Traders.
I wasn't high profile in any sense at all. I had no profile. So I had absolutely no social media presence. I didn't do anything face up at all. And everything I did was about remaining as anonymous as I possibly could. And then I got married. But also, it tends to be with undercover stuff, if you work in telly, that once you hit a certain level, it's quite difficult to get undercover jobs, genuinely purely because of age. So most undercover jobs are your bottom level jobs, basically. Things that are high turnover, where they just need people constantly and they just get you in a job and you can just slip in and out in 3 weeks and no one really notices because people quit all the time. Once you're 30-something years old, those jobs are a little harder to pass for, because I think the people who employ them go, why does this person who's this age want to do this job? And so it starts to get a little bit more difficult, I think. And so then you start training other younger people how to do that thing. But yeah, once the Scam Interceptors thing came around, once your face is on telly, it was no longer a possibility for me. But getting married was a big part of me just thinking that I didn't really want to take those risks anymore.
Yeah, and it shows that anybody can get scammed. You featured Amanda Holden recently. She was scammed, wasn't she, with somebody pretending to be her, I think.
Yeah, so her experience was slightly different. I mean, obviously it can happen to absolutely anybody, but her experience was that there are people online who use her face to scam other people. So they pretend to be her, and then they will talk to fans of hers and say, for example, this is Amanda's profile, I'm her manager, we can sort out a VIP meet and greet for you on this day in this place, it's £2,000 or whatever, and then the person pays thinking they're going to get to meet Amanda Holden, and obviously it's not her. So what we did in the show was we worked with one of our particular ethical hackers, a guy called Dan, who's like an unbelievable social engineer. And he got in contact with one of Amanda's scammers, managed to get him to a place where he was able to access that scammer's computer. And then what we were able to do was introduce Amanda to the guy who was pretending to be her. And the moment where she sees what he looks like, because we'd been able to access this guy's computer, which means we could turn his webcam on so we could see his face when he was at work. And yeah, we introduced Amanda to him, and it was an amazing moment. It's honestly something that I want to make into like a format, but I'm not quite sure that the appetite is there to do it on a wider scale. But I just know there's so many problems with celebrity impersonation scams. And there's a ton of people out there in the UK who are being impersonated online, who are famous faces. And in my brain, we could get them all down and do an episode in each one where we show them the person who's been pretending to be them online, and then they get to confront them like Amanda did.
Like celebrity scammers.
Yeah, basically,
I mean,
yeah.
Traitors is doing very well. So.
Well, exactly. And also like Amanda, when she had the opportunity to talk to this guy who'd been scamming people pretending to be her, she went full Roger Cook for 5 minutes, and she really did an effective job of doorstepping this guy. And I thought Amanda did brilliantly at it. I'm sure other famous faces would also love the opportunity to confront people who are pretending to be them and would like to try that out and to try doorstepping someone. So yeah.
Well, who knows? That could be what's ahead in 2026. Just finally, Nick, what is ahead? Are you doing more Scam Clinic, which is your podcast?
Yes. So my wife and I make a podcast together called Scam Clinic, and we're going to put the second series out this year. Series 1, what we did was we interviewed victims of scams, and then we tracked down the person who scammed them, and then we interviewed them as well. So we would try and hold specific scammers to account for things that they'd done to specific individuals. And it was all episodic like that. So it was one episode by episode, different story and different type of scam in every episode. What we decided to do this time is a bit different. We realised that the thing that people really liked about the first series of the show was hearing me talking to scammers. So we thought, how can we get more scammer time on the phone with me? So basically what we decided to do in collaboration with the partner we have on the podcast is to pay £500 into a scam. So I got scammed on purpose by an investment scam so that I could record every conversation I have with my investment scammers. And what the series is a bit investigative, a bit true crime, in that we're telling a story of how I was scammed on purpose, but we're bringing you along for the investigation as we go. So we drop details about the company who scammed me into every episode, and we want our listeners to listen to it and to help with the investigation as the series progresses. So we have 8 episodes in total, and we've left 2 of those episodes completely clear because we're going to use those 2 episodes to investigate the tips that we get from the first episodes as they come out, as people investigate as we go along. And basically, it all starts with an advert on social media where I click through, dodgy ad of, unfortunately, as ever, Martin Lewis. Sorry, Martin.
Martin gets impersonated a lot too.
Not really Martin. Saying investment opportunity. I sign up and we just go from there. And it leads to some very interesting places indeed that you would not expect, including some people whose names are on the bill for the company in Britain who definitely do not want their names associated to this company.
Well, I shall look forward to listening to some episodes. When does that come out?
I am hopeful that we'll get an episode out in the next 4 weeks and that it will be monthly from there, but TBC.
You clearly live and breathe what you do, Nick, and it's lovely that Lise is obviously so involved as well and such a massive support. I could just talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but you'll be relieved to know we're at the end of our convex conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you so much for coming in.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Helen. Thank you very much for having me.
You've been listening to Scam Interceptors co-presenter and BAFTA-winning, I'm going to say it again there, BAFTA-winning investigative journalist Nick Stapleton, talking about his incredible work helping people avoid being scammed. I hope you've taken some useful tips away from today's chat, and if you want more, I highly recommend Nick's book, How to Beat Scammers, which really does do what it says on the tin. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with somatic movement educator Nahid de Belgium. Join me then.